Today I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the apparent contradictions in the Buddha Dharma. There's contradictions in everything in life. Anything we hold on to, there's going to be a consequence of what seems true and real in one light, in another light will seem false. And it can sometimes be very tiring and disheartening for a practitioner, almost like having the carpet swept from under one's feet. A person who practices the Mahayana Buddhism or practices Theravada Buddhism or practices Tantra, Vajrayana. A Christian practitioner who's segueing into Buddhist practice might question whether there's contradiction in doing so. To be a Christian and a Buddhist at the same time, is that possible? Or a Muslim, or another faith? Amongst religions, people talk about conflict between them. And within dharmas, specific dharmas themselves, within the Mahayana, even within a particular branch of Mahayana, there's different sects that vie amongst themselves. A classic example might be emptiness. There's a major division because some think that to say something is empty, it means that the thing itself by nature is empty. That's the emptiness of self. Others talk about emptiness as emptiness of other, like a thing is empty of own being or self. So that's emptiness of other. This emptiness of other is quite a wonderful view held by many of the greatest masters on the planet. It originated, as in the form we know it today, through a great master named Dopopa, and a branch of Buddhists evolved out of that named Jonongpas. And then there's the others that say that there isn't no emptiness of anything, of self, that things are just empty in themselves. Their nature is empty. So there's nothing to empty out. Whatever you want, however you want to describe it, that takes us to levels of understanding that most of us haven't reached. I certainly haven't. I know of them, and I try and understand them, but I cannot claim to do so. But I break it down into simple terms so that I can progress on the path gradually and gain understanding. And what I have found is that as far as gaining understanding goes, one has to understand that contradictions that appear that we can clearly see intellectually between different modes of thought are contradictions that we eventually will see through when we reach a deeper understanding than we have at present. So at present we may understand something intellectually, but we cannot take that to mean that we understand it in the true sense. A classic example of this is the Christian teachings, for example. And some ask, well, can a Christian be a Buddhist? And some Buddhists might tell you, well, no, that's a contradiction. No Christian can be a Buddhist. Then why not? One might wonder, why can't a Christian be a Buddhist? Well, because their doctrines are very different. You know, Buddhists don't believe in a creator and so forth. Reincarnation and these kind of things. So some might say, well, there's a contradiction in being a Christian and a Buddhist. But if we're a Christian, we certainly can be a Buddhist also. And many Christians have done just that. The problem with thinking that a Christian cannot become a Buddhist is just based on a failure to understand that almost anything can be a door to higher understanding. And while it might be true that at some point, if one's a Christian and becomes a Buddhist, or wants to become a Buddhist, that one will have to give up one's Christian views. Well, that I wouldn't disagree with. Great masters have said that. Many great masters have said that. But the same great masters have also said that you can be a Christian and a Buddhist at the same time. So what gives? Well, obviously what gives is that what the masters are saying is that keep your Christian ways until you grow out of them, or you see past them, because they're helpful to a certain point, even if one's practicing as a Buddhist. The Christian values, the ethics, morality, various contemplations within the Christian Dharma. It's very rich, and until one reaches a certain level of understanding, one can practice the Christian faith within Buddhism and use it to enrich Buddhism. They mutually support each other. One can use various Buddhist meditation techniques, and I have actually done this for a couple of years actually, to recite or contemplate certain Christian doctrines. And because Buddhism has some methods that are very advanced and effective for doing develop some of the views that Christ talked about, the Bible talks about. So whatever works for one is a door, and Christianity is certainly a door to Buddhist practice to a certain point. And at a certain point, when one understanding develops significantly, then one will naturally evolve to see the contradiction of, or the way forward will mean that certain viewpoints have to be left behind and new viewpoints adopted, particularly when one enters the realm of emptiness and understanding emptiness. But that's a long ways off for most of us. And if we can aspire as a Christian, employ Buddhist techniques to get there, if our faith is really strong in Christian values and Christian way, then to abandon that would be counterproductive, because one can take all of that into Buddhism and use it as a door to grow past those views, whatever they are. So one employs Buddhism to become a better Christian, in effect. So I mentioned earlier that even within Buddhism, Buddhists vie amongst themselves about various doctrines. An example might be, take for example, the Four Noble Truths: suffering, accumulation, extinction, and the way. There is suffering. There is the extinction of suffering, the path leading to the extinction of suffering, and so forth. How we understand that, when we, in another Mahayana text might say, well, there is no suffering as accumulation, extinction, or the way, as it says in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. There is no form, feeling, perception, impulses, and consciousness. So what gives? I mean, do we just say that the Four Noble Truths is wrong and the Mahayana, so-called Mahayana view is right? Of course not, because the Four Noble Truths are a door that leads to understanding, to the Prajnaparamita teachings. And you never understand the Prajnaparamita teachings until one understands the Four Noble Truths. And by that I don't mean an intellectual understanding. If you contemplate the Four Noble Truths, like I know of meditators that have said that while contemplating the Four Noble Truths, they got so lost in it that they actually got up in fear and started sweating, and then became completely afraid through being absorbed into the truth of it, through meditation, Four Noble Truths. So they are very real, and they're real as long as you have not developed an understanding that transcends them. And unless one develops that understanding that transcends them, one will never be able to transcend them. And one can, parrot the teachings of the Prajnaparamita texts, that nothing exists and so forth. But the fact remains is that to understand that, the truth of that, one has to believe just the opposite, that there is suffering, that there is, that suffering is very real. You have to believe that form is real. Sound, smells, taste, everything that the Prajnaparamita says doesn't exist. Until one really reaches that point, it's pointless to take that position. You cannot. You can take it as a scholar takes it and be able to discuss the various points of view on this. But as far as actual realization, that form does not exist. Sounds, smells, tastes, and sensations don't exist. Thoughts don't exist. if one says that, one just makes a fool out of oneself, complete fool. It's makes much more sense to say, yeah, form does exist. Sounds exist. Tastes exist. Smell exists. Sensations exist. Thoughts exist. Why? Because if one says that they exist and takes the position that they exist, then one can contemplate their mode of existence. In what sense do they exist? How do they exist? What is the ontological status of these of form, feeling, perception, impulses, and consciousness? How do they exist? In what sense do they exist? If one assumes a position, before understanding that, if one assumes the position of the Prajnaparamita and says, oh, there's no form, feeling, impulses, consciousness, and everything else, you just make a fool out of yourself. Your girlfriend breaks up with you, and you go into shock. And then what? No form, no feeling, no impulses, no consciousness, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't mean anything to you. So as long as, we're in this body, and we have an appetite, we enjoy food when we have it. We enjoy good drink when we have it. When it's freezing outside, we have to put on a jacket. Obviously, it's not empty for us. We're not there yet. So the approach that's correct is to say, yes, yeah, this cold that I feel is really, it's real. This hunger I feel is real. What is its mode of existence? We have to assume that things are real in order to investigate them. And then, through investigation, find out that they're not real. And then we enter the Prajnaparamita with understanding, through understanding. So the door is actually to assume that everything exists. Like, we say there's no self. Well, that's very beautiful to say. But the fact of the matter is that somebody steals your stuff, and all of a sudden you're running around and, cursing and feeling bummed out. And the guy next to you could care less about it. So what self is it that is having a freak out about it, that identified with those things? Had attachment to those things that got stolen. The neighbor didn't care at all. So what is that self? So the Prajnaparamita won't help you there. It won't help you to think, everything is empty. But what will help is to say, okay, my things got stolen. They belong to me. I feel bummed out. Obviously, there's some kind of self in me. What is its mode of existence? If we have that attitude, we can investigate its mode of existence, and we can unravel it. And once we unravel it, then we're ready for the Prajnaparamita teachings. But without unraveling it first, it's kind of ridiculous to look down on any teaching, because one thinks that such and such a view is the highest view. Lower views always lead to higher views. Assuming a higher view without working through the lower views is like, entering the advanced mathematics when you should be in first grade. It will all be meaningless to you. And the Mahayana, Vajrayana, so many teachings are meaningless without passing through all of the preliminary teachings. So, in conclusion, I just would say that it's important not to develop Mahayana arrogance if we're Mahayana practitioners, and understand that yes, Mahayana is great. It's fantastic. And ultimately there is no self. There is no suffering. There is no form feeling ultimately. But as a Mahayana practitioner, I know that for me, until I truly understand that, it's merely words. And I have to develop understanding. And the way to develop that understanding is, as I just said, to assume what we know intellectually is wrong and may not be correct, and but for practical purposes, the lower rungs of the ladder are what get you to the higher rungs. So we have to be practical and humble ourselves and say, yeah, these certain teachings are higher than others, but that the door to get to those higher teachings are the lower rungs of the ladder, and that's where I'm going to focus my attention. That's the right attitude, and that's the attitude that brings happiness and contentment and joy when one understands and rests content in oneself and one's failure to be at the highest, but at least know that what we're doing is going to get us there, and we're on the right track, and we're happy. We're just happy to practice the Dharma. And it doesn't have to be the highest Dharma. We're just happy to practice the Dharma. And that's really where it's at as far as practice goes, whether one's a Theravada practitioner or a Mahayana practitioner. We just have to be content where we are and go gradually up through the different levels of understanding, and not assume a higher understanding when we haven't really built any foundation for ourselves. Good luck to everybody. It's not easy. It's a lot of work.